Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 13 of the Lebanese Biodiversity Podcast. My name is Mira, and I am an entomologist. Today, we will be speaking to Mohammad Abdallah, an agricultural engineer and PhD who specializes in invasive plant species. We already interviewed Mohammad in episode 12 in Arabic. It is a short format covering the same topic, so go ahead and check it if you haven't. Now, back to the episode today. We'll be speaking about the strategies that invasive plant species use to become so successful, why they are an issue, and many examples from Lebanon. And of course, what can be done to mitigate their harmful effects. So, enjoy and tell us what you think. Hello, Muhammad. How are you today?
Hello, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Can you introduce us to yourself?
My name is Mohammad Abdallah. I am an agriculture engineer and I hold a PhD in plant biology. I studied, uh, I study and work on invasive plant species, more specifically how they move from being non-native plants to invasive plant species. It's a quite interesting word, and I make sure to make all these interesting studies to understand the mechanism behind these their successful establishment into the new ecosystem they come into.
Okay, why did you choose to study this? And
Um,
like how did you get introduced to the concept of invasive plants?
it was actually a very interesting switch in my career. I studied agriculture engineering at the Lebanese University, and in my fourth year, in my master 1 year, there was this topic that was presented among the topics that the students have to choose to graduate and hold for their master degree. And there was this topic about invasive plant species that everybody ran away of because it's a new topic. It's almost non-existing in the country, and almost we don't have that much of scientific knowledge on this topic in Lebanon, and which is something was very curious for me because I like these kind of adventurous kind of stuff. And it was interesting because it wasn't the typical classical topic, yet something it's a new and challenging. So I chose this, and it was a little bit in my first year in my master was I have to understand the bibliography of the concept of invasion ecology and what does it mean to have the invasive species and all this stuff. And then in my master two degree, in the thesis, we decided to focus exactly on two invasive species in the country, which is Ailanthus altissima, the tree of heaven, and Oxalis pescapra humaida.
Mm-hmm.
And we did this study on these two species, and it was very interesting to dive into the whole multi-dimension kind of things to understand how they've been brought to Lebanon, the story of their introduction, their distribution, how they have been distributing, and if there's any previous records. And with our study, what were the records that could be as a knowledge gap or like to do this all this stuff. And that was very interesting for me. And since then, I decided this is kind of my career, and I want to continue doing my career in invasion ecology and more or less about invasive plant species.
Okay. As a side note, when I used to see these plants when I was younger and even when I was little, I always assumed that they had always been there. They always looked like they were at home, if that makes sense. So I suppose that knowing that they are non-natives, that they became invasive, also changes your way of reading a landscape and your perception of these plants. I mean, they are fascinating, but you also realize that what you thought was at home is actually kind of out of place.
Yeah, it's interesting your perspective because it's kind of similar to how I felt about it at the beginning. And now, whenever I told people about, hey, listen, Humaida, that remind us of our village, our childhood, our grandparents, and the common sentence that we all
Yeah,
have.
under the olive trees. Yes.
Exactly. And
Yes, I
this sentence, like, we need to wash them because there's something did something on them. So we need to wash them before eating them. And it's kind of connecting with your childhood in all this greenery and the orchard, the olive orchard and all this stuff. And suddenly that become as a non like some question about, oh, so even that was not the reality of my country, it's also an invader. And it's interesting to see how the this notion changed the facial expression of the people that they know this information, like, oh, really, it's always connected to us, it's always connected to our history, and then it's not from here, it's an invasive species. So yeah, it's really interesting, and especially the topic of invasion species, it makes you reconsider what you have been seeing all over your life, and kind of restructure your vision again into the whole ecosystem, as well into the sceneries of the landscape in your town and the areas around you, and even in your connection with nature, if you have this kind of connection with that.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, exactly. I totally agree. And this gives you perspective. And also, I'm curious to know, after this first project that you worked on in Lebanon, how did this lead you to work on your current research and your current projects? So, what ideas did this give you? And how did you start working on your new research project and end up outside of Lebanon?
And when I was diving into the thesis and going all these field works, and like there was like this information in my mind have been constantly being changed. Like, oh, I thought all my life this species is from our ecosystem, from our heritage, let's say at some point. And when
Yes.
you talk to the people, like, oh, we used to do the bulbs of Humaida in the oxalis. We used to part of our food. Some people do it fatayr in some areas of Lebanon. And these make me kind of make me really interested, because I like things that challenge me. And this was a very interesting challenge to see, like, this small creature that we all see as a silent creature. They have this impact, and they have this story, and they have this dimension that we never thought it could be. So that led me to, I want to invest more time in this topic, in the sense in my career. I want to have something more challenging, and something made me reconsider and make me every time reshape this mindset of mine when it comes to plant. And I decided directly to move forward from a master to a directly to search for a PhD topic, because it was clear for me at that time I want to continue and start my career in this interesting topic, because it's not one dimensional thing. It's something that you need to understand the past and the present in order to see how the future gonna change, or even gonna predict all these changes around you. So that was a very, that topic exactly was very like significant event in my life to make me realize, like, this is how I'm gonna be continuing my career, which is something I'm really glad to do, because now every day when I wake up, I'm really happy to do this in life, and I never expected to do it till go this far. And it's really interesting, and every day I learn something new, especially with the all these challenges that's happening from climate change and all this stuff. It's really interesting.
Yes, and with climate change now, I mean, unfortunately, but with how things are moving now, you have an infinite amount of work to do on this topic, be it in Lebanon
Absolutely.
or elsewhere. And yes, this is something we need to be working on now. So you chose to do a PhD after this. Do you want to tell us a bit about this? What did you work on during your PhD?
Yeah. So after my master thesis and all these, let's say, baby discoveries compared to now what I know in the field, um, I decided now it's time to do it, because it's clear for me. I have the energy for it. I want it. I want to do it. And then I was searching for topics and for opportunities, and finally I found a really interesting research group in Spain, where we create together a research proposal about understanding how non-native plant species establish themselves to become invasive, because there's this big difference between exotic plants can be exotic but not can be invasive, but
Mm-hmm.
then there's also the exotic plants can be invasive because they need to have some certain mechanism to become invasive. So that was the topic of the thesis, to understand a different mechanism for their successful invasion, and we worked on like 22 species between
Oh,
native and
wow.
non-native coming to and across the Mediterranean from different origin like Southeast Asia and South America, Latin America exactly. And we studied how a biotic interaction, that's mean their interaction with pollinators, was one invasion mechanism in the sense of non-native or exotic plants have this higher number of flowers to attract more pollinators and even have a better nectar to have the sweeter food web, let's say. So that was one of the mechanisms that these exotic plant can attract pollinator and they can succeed when they have this they have this seeding and the seed production. We also studied how the physiology of the plants, like the photosynthesis rate and even the water capture and the nitrogen capture was different between native and non-native. And we realize in invasive plants or non-native plants, they have these mechanisms to capture more energy so they can have more photosynthesis, more production of leaf. That was one mechanism for them to do the invasion. We studied also other dimension in the sense of allelopathy. That's mean the production of chemical with plants, that some invasive exotic plants have a higher degree of allelochemical production, which is a killer for the surrounding species. So that also was one way of mechanism by establishing themselves in the hosting ecosystem, and that mechanism can kill all these surrounding species, which could be leading to dominance only of the invasive species. And we also studied the herbivory. That's mean one herbivore, what can they do when they eat native and non-native, because some species can produce seeds and to guarantee the offspring for the next generation, but other plants can produce allelochemicals to let these herbivores to go away and not eating them. So what was also one interesting dynamic to understand what could defer them to be more superior as plant. And that made me really interested in continuing further in my research, because it's not only one dimension. We just studied 5 or 4 different dimension all coexisting in under the umbrella of invasive plants. And still there was a lot of things to discover which we were not able to do because of the time and the funding and everything. But it was really interesting because that made me realize and look into the plants from different perspective, like, oh, maybe it's not about the flower, it's about leaf. Maybe it's about something below the soil. Maybe it's about some kind of volatile uh, smell or something, which made me still every day glad to do it. And I'm still gonna do it because it's really interesting to see all these silent creatures. They are not silent, they are still existing and having their own mechanism to survive and evolve and coexist together.
Well, th this is already a lot of research questions that you were able to fit into one PhD, just to be clear.
Yeah, yeah, it was
And
really hard but interesting one.
yes, well, I mean, you can be, of course, very proud of the work you did. Again, it is a lot of work to fit in such a small time frame. And also, I didn't realize that invasive plants had this many strategies to be able to make themselves at home. Not only do they have strategies that let them be more efficient at growing and seeding, but they also are competition to other plants through kind of killing them sometimes, and
Yeah.
also being competition by attracting local pollinators to them instead of the native plants. Wow, that's a lot of how can I say this? Like they're really trying to have all the chances on their side to be able to survive. Like they're not taking any chances.
No. Um, and it is interesting because it make you realize, even you as a human being, when we think everything is about us and around us, when you silently sit and look closely into their words and to see like these creatures can have this strategic and smart strategy to coexist, compete, and coexist. At some point, they coexist in a very nice habitat, but sometimes it's a very dramatic way, and sometimes it's a good way. It's not always negative, but the vast majority of events show you it's a negative impact. At some places, they can have these strategies, as we said, like they can attract pollinators by having more showy flowers, more interesting colors, and probably you know more than me that the pollinators are attracted to kind of showy flowers, and also they have this high number of flowers and these nectar, sweet nectar, and even the characteristics within each flower. It's more accessible for the pollinator itself when it comes to the invasive species. So pollinators can go directly into structure or morphology of anatomy of a flower that is more or less easier for them to access to the nectar, which make you understand like there's a huge evolution happening out there, and there's a huge smart strategy to attract these small creature for them, for their site, to make them exist and like establish themselves as a dominant species, and it's really interesting.
So as you were saying, when we look at plants, because we cannot speak to them, and because they cannot move, we always assume that they kind of exist effortlessly. But there is actually a lot of effort that goes into their survival, be it, well, native plants or, as you discussed now, as we were discussing now, the strategies that invasive plants use. But it's um, it's not easy to appreciate how much effort goes into it when you cannot see any of these processes. When you look at it, you just see a plant, if that
Absolutely.
makes sense.
Yeah,
So thank you for
absolutely.
shedding light on all of this. This was very
Absolutely.
interesting to know. Yes.
Because most people don't have this eye to understand like every life form around us have their own story and they have their own history and everything. And when you closely sit and take notes or like just sit and see them, and you see like these years of evolution that led them to be here existing around our context, that's also something we have to see, we have to understand, and we have to uh, admire probably or respect at some point. But yeah, it's really interesting. It's not only a silent creature existing in the corner, they have been here also fighting with us and evolving with us to be here, and it's fascinating to see this evolution process on what context made them here. Yeah, it's that's why I'm telling you, even if I continue for the next 45 years of my life or whatever, uh, I would be more every day. I will be waking up very happy to learn something new about them, because every day there is something new to discover.
Yes, there is an infinite amount of new things to discover, and well, I hope that you will be able to do this for many more years to come.
Thank you.
And well, for this next section, I have a few questions about Lebanon. So this will be like speculations or with the background and the information that you have. I
Yeah.
have a few questions on what could be happening in Lebanon at this level. So my first question is, how much do we actually know about invasive plants in Lebanon? Has there been research recently? Are there any plans to have more research in the coming years? And like, is this something that has a good level of awareness? And I'll stop asking questions. I've asked you three questions so far, so
No.
please go ahead.
In Lebanon, if you want to talk formally wise for the country, we don't have even an official list of exotic species. We're talking
Okay.
about plants, fungi, insects, reptiles. We don't have that official list of exotic ones, not the ones that can be invasive, like the exotics one. This led also to the public awareness in the country. People are not aware about the concept of invasive species, regardless of what is their origin and what is their branch of family is. Uh, there's a lot of reasons behind of that. so far you can see the mentioning of the word invasive species or alien species, regardless what they are, in few documents here and there between like reports of biodiversity and like some small mentioning, but you don't have this full on official scientific paper that talk about invasive species in the country, which is for me personally something also interesting, because also me as someone who has experience in this field, it could be some knowledge gap that I can cover with, of course, with the collaboration of people that work more or less in the topic of uh, biodiversity in Lebanon. But it is something non-existing officially wise and paper wise in the country, of the existence of full uh, full list of that, or even small guidelines here and there about the topic. This because also we don't have like a current knowledge of the topic among the universities. So when you go to different universities in the country to talk about invasive species, you don't see within the courses that have been taught to the students about the concept of invasive species. Whenever you dig into courses like biodiversity or forest management or even botany, we don't have these topics included within these courses, which that leads also to the future people who are going to be graduate to not be aware on this problem and not be aware of the existence of this field, regardless if it's considered a problem or not, of the existence of this field. So in general, Lebanon, we're still way behind uh, even the basics when it's covering invasive plants or invasion ecology. But I'm trying with the little time that I have here in Lebanon to make people more and more aware about it, just not for the sake of science, but also for the sakes of for themselves, because invasive species is a problem that can happening in the context of their small agricultural land, but also on the bigger context when it comes to conservation of a biosphere or bio or even mahmiya, sorry for the word in the Arabic, but also like also like this knowledge has supposed to be, and we're trying to make it more and more aware public, so people at least have the knowledge of the topic, and then they can realize it later on, however they're gonna do their later on steps when considering invasive species in the country.
So there is not even a preliminary list of non-native plants, be it invasives or otherwise. And this, in all cases, is the first step in order to be able to have a functional list for protected areas, so be it Mahmiye or Hema, in order to use this information to safeguard the plant diversity or the flora of these protected areas. Well, I hope that you will be able to work on this in the coming years, and in all cases, you will need a lot of help. So, yeah, maybe some people listening here will be interested in this.
Yeah, that's like one of the strategy of invasion. Also, the minds of the people now they're gonna be listening for this. Like, if you could be interested, you can be helpful. Like, it's a
Yeah,
mechanism.
I'm just sliding this in there. Yeah.
That's also one mechanism I learned from invasive species, like how to make your way within the chaos that's happening there. But yeah, that's actually a plan that I've been thinking about the past month. I wanna do this preliminary list of exotic plant species, particularly because it's my field, and then from here till we can publish one official guideline, maybe a lot of opportunities will be popping up here and there about let's do things more further when it comes to management, or even having more interesting list of prioritizing them in some contexts in Tanourin, let's say, or Shuf or Ammi, whatever these hotspots that we consider we need to conserve in Lebanon. I
Okay.
am.
So, can you give us a few examples, even though you just told us that there was no list, no official list, but can you give us a few examples of invasive plants that we have in Lebanon, to shatter more of our childhood dreams? What else is invasive?
I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry for being this person, like pop up all these beautiful memories. Um, Oxalis pescapra al-Humayda again is an invasive species, and actually, here comes the saddest part. It's one of the worst ones in Lebanon because when you automatically see it's correlated in all these images with olive orchard, at some point all these species that have been living below the trees of olive orchids, all these wild plants and all these wild insects that used to feed on these wild plants have somehow been disturbed by the invasion of Humaida and or the Oxalis, which is not good if you want to take into consideration the whole ecosystem functioning that was relatively related to the natives or to the local flowers that was coexistence once under these trees. Oxalis pescapra is an invasive one. We have an Ailanthus altissima is considered one of among the top 10 worst invasive species in the world. Ailanthus altissima it's in Lebanon called شجرة السما أو شجرة الجنة because of its height. It can reach like 27 meters, and the mythology behind it, it can call heaven whenever you see this tree because it's reach out directly to the sky. We have Lantana camara. I don't know the name in Arabic. Lantana camara is
Oh, is it?
widely, it's from Mexico, and it's one of
Okay.
the its invasion mechanism is because of pollinators, because it have all these showy flowers and
Yeah.
this abundant number of flowers. This is attracting a lot of pollinators and
Well, I do
also
see a lot of native pollinators on it, on a side
yeah.
note. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So this also could be like for you to dig behind like what could have been before these Lantana Camara, because you see it all over the country. You see it all over. Like I live in Beirut and I see it in Harish, Beirut. It's full of
Yes.
Lantana Camara, which is really bad. In AUB campus, you can see it all over the campus. It's all over the country, all over the areas. You go from the seashore to the mountain to the Bekaa Valley. It's all over the area. It's
I
really
didn't realize that it could, that it had the capacity to escape gardens. I
it
always
ha
assumed that it was planted there. Okay, it can. Okay, this is very interesting to know.
that could be a potential project to you and me to understand the invasion mechanism behind pollinator interaction of invasive
Yes.
species. The case of Lantana camara, more
Well,
specifically.
yes. I mean, my side note on native pollinators was in the Beirut area and a little bit around Bremena area, and in these places that were very highly urbanized, well, especially Beirut, I have no idea what the pollinators would be foraging on otherwise.
Yeah, see, this is so. All these three species. We also have Arundodonus, which in Arabic Lebanese تحديدا we call it القصب. القصب is not
Yes,
from our region. It's from China. There's no specific record on where exactly geographically from China because China is huge. We have the acacia tree, or we call it mimosa. It's also not from our region. It's more or less from Australia. And also we have the Kina one. The Kina is an invasive tree that have been brought to Lebanon during the Australian army time in Lebanon. There's no official record, but some people say they brought it to one way to do the management or against the malaria in Lebanon, because probably Kina can absorb all the water, and like the mosquito do the eggs and the larvae are inside water. So when these tree absorb the water, these pond get dry, so these larvae dies. So basically was one way of biological control against the malaria, but
okay.
it is a case of an invasion. You can see it all over. Oh, you can see it in places, for example, in the north of Lebanon, they have been planting it as representative as a native tree to Lebanon. But later on, when we did this small chat with the locals that this is an invasive tree, the debate have changed a little bit and they left a little bit shocked. So I'm these kind of people like go around locals and just shatter beautiful memories, and like they look at me, it's like, why you do this?
Yeah, well,
So
this one
yeah,
is the only one I actually knew that it was
Gina.
invasive. Yes, and well, I mean, I am surprised that drying up water in an area can be considered as a benefit, but I mean, okay, sure, as you say, it might have been for a cause that would have made sense when it was imported, like trying
Yeah.
to have less potential sites for the reproduction of mosquitoes. Well, okay, so let's see what else.
What else? These are the ones in my mind because the thing is, uh,
The most
and
emblematic.
yeah, these are the most problematic, the most widespread all over the country. There's also other ones, but there's one species that I personally been in this debate with a lot of scientists is kharwa. It's Ricinus
Oh,
communis,
okay. Well,
which
yeah. Is it
some
invasive?
people
Because
say,
I see so much of it in degraded areas.
yeah, some people say it's native. Other ones see it's native. Other ones it's invasive, and there's no official record. The official records say it's originally from East Africa, but the distribution range of this species is very wide. It can cover from all over the Middle East region, from North Africa till Iran and Iraq, which is for me, I don't know if this is PC, and it's a personal debate within myself if I could call it invasive or native one. So
Okay, yeah,
these
I
are
just
the,
checked the range also. The range is very wide, so it's not doesn't give you any clue.
yeah.
Uh,
There's other ones, but the names in Arabic I don't know them, and yeah. And in Latin, if you don't have like this connection with the Arabic words, because also if you don't have the connection with the common name in the area, it's hard for the people to know which species it's
yes.
about. But we
Well,
can provide
also,
pictures on that.
yeah, sure. We can, if you want to the video for this episode, add a few extra pictures of invasive plants for people who are curious with their Latin name, and also just another idea for a project that we are doing for wild
Mhm.
bees with a Moroccan colleague of mine. We are inventing Arabic names
Okay.
because we realize that there is a need to be able to have common names in Arabic for the native bees to be able to raise awareness around them
Sure.
or around that topic. So, yeah, I'm sliding another idea in here for people listening to this episode. Why not have common
Arabic.
names for the invasive species that we have, for the native, for the
Absolutely.
plant species that we have? Sorry. Okay,
There's
so
there's a lot of potential when it comes to, further digging in the topic. It's like there's a lot of things to cover.
there is a lot of things to do. Yes, I can't help but mention this now because I thought about it. So, coming back to the case of Lebanon, well, we haven't left it, but what can the effects or the damages of invasive plants be um, on native plants? So this is the first half of the questions. You kind of answered this in the beginning by saying that they can produce chemicals that make it difficult for other plants to grow around them. But what other issues can invasive plants create for native plants?
So, if you want to take into consideration the biotic interaction, that's mean interaction with pollinators, most probably a lot of species they need pollinators and in order to have this seed formation and dispersal and all this stuff. So once there's an invasive species like Lantana camara, which is very known with this high number of flowers and like showy flowers and multicolors of flowers and probably the good nectar, and you see there's a lot of native pollinators coming to pick up the honey dew or the nectar, and leaving behind all these native species unpollinated and without pollen, and probably without seed formation for the next generation. This is leading to the certain extent to the extinction of this local species around them. This is also one of the threats. So when you see, for example, if the audience can now imagine lantana camara is happening, you can barely see any other species around them because all these pollinators that got used to lantana camara, they're barely visiting any other species. So this has led at certain point to the decline of the native species population, and at some certain scenarios to the extinction of these species. We have also the case, the chemical thing that we talked about, but also we have the case of the vegetation competition. When we're talking about the case of Kina, or the talk of Ailanthus shajarat sama, although Ailanthus have this allochemical impact and effect that can impact the surrounding ecosystem, but also the shading and the height of these trees, because these trees, when they go up to 15 or 20 meters or whatever x high meter, this shadow is not giving the below species below them the light, which is impacting their photosynthesis activity, and at certain point declining the surrounding population, and also the leading to extinction. So there's a lot of threats. If we don't want to talk ecologically speaking, we need to talk agriculture speaking. In the case of Humayda, there used to be a lot of families living on cultivating, let's say, za'atar or fool or all these crops. And when you see Oxalis pescapra al happening in this orchard, you always see it in your mind. It's like sejede. It's the
Yeah, yeah, it does
orchard is.
cover everything underneath.
Exactly, and which that lead to not having the production of the yield of the crop that has been planted, having this good yield. So basically, not able to cover to have this decent amount of money to survive. But also, it's very hard to do the management of Oxalis pescapra because um, we cannot use the biomass for grazing because it have this toxic compound within the Oxalis pescapra. So the goats or the sheep or any kind of animal that's want to graze will not be able to graze on these things, and also leading to the other than the economical burden to the farmer or the local community itself. There's the local community of the pollinator. There's no other option except these Oxalis pescapra, although in Lebanon, it's not the case. Oxalis need to be pollinated in Lebanon because it's outside their native range. They can be distributed and dispersed as asexual reproduction, which mean by bulbs. So
Mm.
that's the only mechanism here in Lebanon. So at certain point, they don't need pollinator, but pollinator needs them. That's the dilemma that we're facing in this country. Like,
Yeah, well, when you have kilometers of only this flowering, pollinators have no choice. They are on a diet. They are on an exclusive diet.
absolutely, this is the case. So yeah, we have a lot of the impact can be multi kind of impact, going from thinking about communities of pollinators, but also communities of the native plants that existing around them, but also the locals who's living and feeding their families from the money that from these crops that have been planting, but that have been affected by the impact of invasive species.
So, you've mentioned how this can impact individuals. So, be it farmers or people who have small scale agriculture or who simply want to cultivate something in their plot or in their gardens. Um, if you have a garden or if you have a plot of land, what advice would you give to ensure that what we do in the garden or in the small agricultural plot does not create a risk to the native flora? Or, like, how can you help native flora and pollinators thrive if you have a plot of land
Um, for
or a
me,
garden?
yeah, for me personally, as a scientist, and I look at it as a citizen scientist kind of project, the first, if we're still talking about the case of Lebanon, the first thing we need to have this list of exotic plants. So, and to make it more and more and more general towards everybody, and we're talking about everybody, all these people that living in the farms, but also in the city to know this, but more make it more focused towards the villages and the rural communities that living from agriculture, and tell them like, listen guys, we have this invasive species, better better not using them, but if in case you found them, better to remove them. But once you remove them, we have the solution for you to plant more native one. By planting more native one, you are increasing the chance of conserving the population of the pollinators around you. But this also could give you a good benefit of honey production, let's say in the case of Apis mellifera, the bee, but also conserving the other wild pollinators. So in that case, when you go through this debate, okay, we want to remove your invasive ones from your garden, but also there is this as a
Yeah, but we
solution.
have a
This,
solution. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, this solution is to plant uh, species from the area, from our native community, but also they're gonna be benefiting for you and for them. The benefit for you as another source of income, which honey production in some cases, but also a if you are looking forward for more eco-friendly agriculture or agroecology, this conservation of pollinator will kind of make you have a better revenue and better yield and better financial income in these coming years. So this is more or less how we can how this how we can the recommendation to
Mm.
decrease the risk of these invasive species.
Okay, so the first step will still be we actually need a list so that people can identify what these invasive species are, and then alternatives, what they can actually plant, and maybe also ideally be able to link them to local greenhouses that actually produce native seeds, or maybe instructions on being able to um, harvest seeds from some wild plants that they can then that can be used in this context. Well, I mean, the idea is that maybe it would be also interesting to tell them where they can find these alternative plants.
Yeah, ideally, for me, it would be once this list is created, it could be generalized among greenhouses and nurseries in Lebanon because they are among the main sources of the introduction of these exotic plants. And probably because they don't know they are exotic, it's a trend of selling, and we need to sell, and we need because they are beautiful, they are less costly,
Yeah,
they don't
because they
need.
are adaptable. You don't need to water them. They survive on their own.
And absolutely, these are the three main sentences that you hear. Like, because we are the Mediterranean, we have now long period of droughts. We don't need to irrigate them. They can survive on their own. It's less management, less human intrusion or like a human activity to the management and all this stuff. So let's go for exotic, beautiful plant. But the threat is happening on the longer term, and it's shifting across the different species of pollinators that's happening around them. And so that's the thing. It's a big cycle that you need to have the list. You need to generalize it across greenhouses and nurseries, but also across um, um, people who are infected as people who works in agriculture, but giving them solution, not only tell them about the problem and then stop. Like, there's this problem, we can solve it this way, but we need cooperation on the bigger scale, not only small individual. It's happening, like we need to break the cycle at some point.
Okay, and apart from having more control and being more aware of what you plant in your garden or on your balcony, how can the general public get involved in protecting native species and also preventing the threats of invasive species? What else can the general public do, in other words?
But that's an interesting question, and it's a thing that it's the thing that I've been considering lately. The most important thing is to make workshops and to make more public talks about invasive species, so the general audience can know about this problem, so they can understand how to be part of this problem. So once they understand the invasive species and the problem that can causing these species, they can have this round table conversation with an expert or with me or with anybody to what could be the best solution, and they could create some kind of citizen science project, which is very common in Europe and very common across US and Canada and Australia and even in Asia. So
Mm.
we can make this a small links of, oh, hey, so you know now about invasive species. These are the top 10 invasive species that happening here. If you've seen these species, you can upload them uh, on this link and this website, and later on we can have these guidelines to do the management, so these people can be part of the solution of the country, but also part of something more interesting, living in Lebanon under all this chaos, like, we can be part of this change, even though this change is green change, but they can be part of this after knowing this information, which is something to do.
Okay, so involving the public in finding the solutions is something that has to be done eventually. Well, I mean, I agree that citizen science is still in its very beginnings in Lebanon. But yeah, I mean, this is like the fifth idea for a project that we have casually put in this episode.
Exactly,
Uh,
like 5 projects
yeah,
so far.
but having casual roundtables where people where small groups of people meet around a coffee and discuss this and try to find solutions together is actually a great way of getting the public involved. So yeah, why not? Just putting this out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But also you have to think, this is like small window. We're in Lebanon, we're going through a lot of pressures, and we are always tense and feeling all these pressures. So why not shift our mindset a little bit from the obvious pressure and think outside, and like think about this stuff, and maybe could be one way of healing or processing the pressure or even disconnect a little bit. It's always been an idea. Why not just chill and relax by thinking about invasive plants? It's a nice way.
Well, yeah, it is a good way of chilling. I agree. So my last question for this section before we move on to the closing section is what can governmental entities and environmental NGOs help with when it comes to preventing the threats of invasive plants,
When it comes to
invasive species?
government, and more specifically, what can be done is to implement one workshop in the Ministry of Environment or Agriculture about this topic. So the employees who works in the field to be formally informed about this topic. Like, hey guys, there's some expert who works on this stuff, and we can give you a workshop about invasive species to have this common knowledge about it, but also to more specifically on some certain species or cases. So in that case, you create this knowledge in the public places, as in ministry and all these government related institution. This could be one way to move forward. And when it comes to the NGOs, could be start implementing small section to topics related to invasive species, especially in the NGOs that working on agroecology or agriculture in general, to make farmers more aware also on the problem of invasive species. Because if you want to have these kind of sustainable production, we need to eliminate the problem. One of the problems could be invasive species. So the farmers, they will be knowing from the NGOs or from the funding agency or from the institution, like, okay, these are also component of the projects we're going to be implement. We have to take into consideration invasive species. We are well informed about how to deal with invasive species and how we can be moving forward from this part. So this is personally my way. It's to make it, to make the topic approachable to first to the government institution, the one that works in the field of biodiversity, agriculture, or environment, and then also the people and NGOs who works also on this topic. So could be covered up from different places to lower the risk of invasive species across the country.
Okay, okay. Well, thank you very much for this. And
Thank you.
again, as in all the previous sections, there is still quite a bit of work to do. So we
Yeah.
hope that both governmental entities and environmental NGOs will be more involved on the topic in the coming years. And now for the two final questions. The first one being, What advice would you give to future researchers?
The first advice is like please do more works on invasive species and because uh as far as I know there is no other research on invasive plant species or a thesis that except mine. So for the young generation out there that going for graduation projects on biodiversity or agriculture, please choose more species and study invasive species to see how much is interesting and fascinating. And that's like for the younger generation out there. But also for me, one of the main advices I would give for the people who are already recently working on this topic, let's say, especially people who works in landscape and architecture in the one that works with plants in the designing section, please start consider reading more about invasive species and taking into consideration also the context of the plants that you will be putting in your designs, because as much as the exotic plants are beautiful and all these things, we also need to consider and take responsibilities of the species that living among us, native ones and also the pollinators one. These are mainly my advices for them, because as a research we have a lot of big step to do when it comes to the research. One of them is to implement a basic course about invasion ecology among different universities. But meanwhile this is happening, let's start having this slight idea in our minds about if we're going to do a design for a garden, we can have, oh, to take into consideration these native plants and these invasive plants and what we wanted to do in the future of our country. These are mainly my advice for this.
Thank you very much for that. And very last question, I promise. Do you have
I'm
any?
enjoying this.
I'm enjoying this as well. This has been great. Well, do you have any closing ideas, any shout outs or links that you would like us to link below the posts for this episode?
I would like to, if this is possible, to add, if you could be adding my contact below, if somebody is interested to start doing this work and this study, I'm here to support. And especially for young students that could be hearing us and learning about invasive species and they are interested to do any collaboration or anything, or they wanted to take this further. uh, my only closing idea is like I'm here and I'm listening for you, and you can reach out to me and we can create a project to save our country, but also to learn more about this topic. And I'm giving up my support for everybody who wants to reach out and contact me. That's the only way to close it, I guess.
Okay, sure.
I hope it doesn't sound too selfish. So,
No, no, not at all. Well, we can link an email or an account. Well, as you feel comfortable doing, but I will then encourage students, people who are looking for research topics, to contact you if they are interested in studying invasive species or, well, anything parallel to this discipline. And thank you very much for your time. This has been
thank
really
you.
great. I learned a lot, and it has been a blast recording this episode with you. So
Thank
thank
you
you.
for your time as well, and thank you for giving us the platform for this. So thank you as well.
Thank you very much. See you soon.
So, ciao.
Bye.